The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 57th Day. Once they turned into the sea, the ships of Gerard Spira and Nicholas Fterman were caught in terrible storms. It seemed as if the entire nature, as though the own Creator, would have proposed to sink such fleet. Finally, a miracle, and not the less a miraculous expertise of the captains, prevented the wreck, and made possible to dock it, in the Canary Islands, where they waited for better winds to complete the voyage. Already in Kera, Spira, whose ambition for gold was parallel with his courage without limits, organized an improvised expedition of 400 men, and departure immediately towards the south of the Lake Maracaibo, place in which some local legends situated an extremely rich and existent city. He left his general lieutenant, with the assignment of traveling to Santo Domingo, to bring what was missing catch him later in the mountains of Carora. But Nicholas Fterman, who was allied with the lords of Tharsis, far from complying with these orders, he also disposed to march towards the south, but, taking a route much more western, following the indication of some Indians, who were sure to have seen stone constructions. With this objective, he moved to Cabo de la Vila, over the coast of the Sea of the Antilles, and embarked to Santo Domingo, leaving the lords of this, with the captain Antonio de Chaves, and the Catalan soldiers. Soon, Fterman returned accompanied with 80 men, 30 horses, equipment, and fresh aliment, and joined with them, and their departure to southwest, in open contradiction to the instructions of Spira. Instead of 2 Dominican friars, were 3, due to the Lady Violante of Tharsis, had insisted to travel disguised in the form, alleging that the dangers that would lurk her alone in Kera would not be, surely, fewer than the suffered by her familiars in the expedition, argument that convinced the unpredictable men of stone. If the excursion of Spira could be considered as improvised, and scarcely of men and means, the enterprise of Fterman was simply exiguous. Little could do, his 100 men and 50 horses against the untold dangers that lurked in those wild and unknown lands. Neither the small troop of veterans of Santa Marta at the command of Captain Ribera alleviated the situation who joined them, in the midst of the journey. Such men were lost in the jungle, discontent to march pointlessly, after a wealth that not appeared nowhere. After suffering the 1,000 penuries that the tropical forests offer, with their poisonous animals, spiders, insects, ferocious tigers, and the intricate vegetation which had to be opened completely, the invaders experienced the cold wind of the high peaks that surrounds the Dupa Valley. And after the intermission, again in the warm jungle, the plagues, and the wild Indians, who were harassing them endlessly. Nevertheless, they continued unabashedly to the south, crossing the rivers Apure, Huantea, apart from 1,000 minor torrents, and they entered in the actual territory of Colombia. But, such country was out from the concession of the Welshers and Ftermans, and he had no right for its exploration. And thenceforth, there were no evidences that they were in the right path. The few Indians that they achieved to capture gave vague indications about the cities of stone. To the south, always to the south. But to the south, they just found miserable villages, and Indians of peerless savagery, cannibals, and heads hunters, aborigines who poisoned their arrows and spears and followed them tirelessly, ambushing them continuously, attacking them from the rearguard when were marching, and in the camps at the intermissions. After a year and a half, advancing in that route, decimated, most of men converted to living skeletons covered with tracks, the decision to come back was imposed at the criterion of Fterman. Otherwise they could not prevent now the right of the survivors of their desertion. From the 100 men of his troop just 50 were still alive, and most of them in a deplorable state. The lords of Tharsis, on their part, stayed with stoicism during the campaign, and they only lost 3 Catalan soldiers. They pretended to go on to the south, but they didn't find the way to persuade the German. Finally, before his irrevocable determination, they opted for a heroic solution, to which Nicholas could not deny. They will stay there, and continue with the quest. The plan was suicidal, but as any of the sides was disposed to yield, Nicholas Fterman accepted to let them go in secrecy, simulating a straying that would prevent problems with the Welshers, or the charge of desertion. Thus was how one day he separated from the weary column of the Spanish vanguard, and was lost forever, due to neither the Germans of the Welsh house, nor the Spaniards of the kingdom saw them again. Nicholas Fterman continued with his explorations, always disobeying the orders of Regis Spira. In 1539, with Jimenez of Calzada, and Sebastian of Belalcázar, governors of Santa Marta and Quito respectively, with whom he met in the jungle, founded the city of Santa Fe of Bogotá. Then, he undertook with the aforementioned captains, a voyage to Cartagena of Indias, and thence, he moved to Spain with Calzada. Although discoverer and explorer of lands, he didn't obtain any riches, and returned practically ruined. However, when he gave to the lords of Tharsis the news about the luck of the Leto, and the men of stone, they compensated him generously, and employed him in that village of Tours, where he ended his days. And what had happened to the lords of Tharsis in America? After the separation of Nicholas Fterman, they were located on the west side of the eastern mountain range, some 1,000 kilometers from the starting point, and some 300 from the city of Quito, at the height where the river Napo originates. Was a region of cold moor and desolate, where a gelid wind blew that made chill the teeth, and penetrated to the bones. They had found a precipitous path which seemed to be made by the hands of men, due to, at a certain distance stone stacks could be seen that worked as contention walls for the alluvial landslides, and they followed with renewed hope. They didn't imagine either remotely that they still would have to travel 5,000 kilometers to reach their destination. All what Nicholas could give them were 10 horses, and very few provisions. With 4 horses was enough to charge everything, the few victuals, the cage with the chickens, and even the weapons, now useless for the lack of powder. At the vanguard was advancing Leto of Tharsis, who was mounted, and followed by 3 Indians bought in Kera, valuable careless and trail guide. Behind, the other 5 men of stone were riding, and in the rearguard was marching the troop of infantry composed by 7 Catalan soldiers, whose fidelity for their Spaniard masters impulsed them to follow unto death. The Spaniard deckers, of well-known ferocity, were ahead, the whole column exploring the path 50 meters forward. 7 days, they transited through such escarpment, which now descended in full gradient towards a small valley situated, nonetheless, among high mountains. Unknowing it, they were approaching to a northern fortress of the Inca Empire, which served as borderline mark to the Muisca Empire. A garrison of 2,000 Indians, from one or another empire, who rebelled every 6 months to occupy such bastion. When taking a bend, the lords of Tharsis saw the walls and the stone hamlet, while they were approaching there through a set of staggered terraces, placed intelligently for that purpose. A sepulchral silence reigned in the place, and there was no movement. The door lacked of lock, gave the impression to be in front of a depopulated and abandoned citadel. Nevertheless, once they had crossed the wall, the silence plunged under a deafening concert of atrocious screams, and a rain of arrows began to fall over the intruders. Covering Volante, and followed by the infantry, the 5 lords of Tharsis charged with the cavalry over the mass of Indians that penetrated at heaps through the doors of the fortress. Nevertheless, even if the Sevilian blades caused great mortality amongst the aborigines, its quantity was so huge that soon they had to retreat towards the central houses. At the orders of Leto, the lords of Tharsis dismounted, and ran faster to find shelter. In a dwelling without any defense, only surrounded by a rammed earth wall of 2 cubits high, were located Leto of Tharsis, Volante, Rock, the 2 friars, an Indian, and the 5 horses. Through a trapezoidal aperture, they observed how a spooky number of indigents had cornered them into a dead-end trap. Screaming, they called to the other Noyo, Guillermo, who finally responded from the next house, where he will search for protection with the rest of the troop. He was wounded in one leg, something that could be mortal, due to the venom that the Indians put in the head of the arrows, and he warned that 3 soldiers had died, as the 2 Indian servants, and the 2 horses. Nobody imagined how they could resolve such tight situation, when an abrupt silence appeared on the aborigin's side. The lords of Tharsis narrowed the view, and observed how the Indians moved aside with respect to give pass to a personage dressed with woolens of bright colours, and a hat with bonnet formed with red and white feathers. He came seated over a sedan litter charged by 8 men, and carrying a stone axe in his right hand. A group of Indians, who were also distinguished by their clothings, and with evident authority over the warriors, were walking at both sides of the vehicle. The curious caravan stopped at a prudent distance from the invaders, and the occupant of the litter set foot on the floor, disposing himself to deliberate with his companions. Undoubtedly they were discussing the manner to end, as soon as possible, with the Spaniards. When suddenly thundered the scream of Leto of Tharsis, and left everyone nailed on their sight. He had precipitated out, in an instant, without helmet, with the blonde head discovered and the wise sword, to which removed the ribbon to exhibit the stone of Venus, lifted over his head, while he uttered with thunderous voice, Apachikajitamuruna. Apachikajitamuruna. Priwaka Voltingwanan Chanan Chanwayngiri. Pukara Tharsi. Surprised, the newcomers remained in silence, but, after looking each other, screamed immediately, Wangsaquiliated! Wangsaquiliated! Then, trembling, as victim of a chill of terror, the one of the litter exclaimed, Wangsaquiliating and Chanwayngiri! Wangsaquiliating and Chanwayngiri! When the Indians heard these words, they moved back some steps, broadening the clear space formed in front of the shelter of the Spaniards. Leto of Tharsis had returned to the house, as surprisingly as he erupted in the scene, and he was watching, at safeguard, the reaction of the natives. "What have you told them?" asked one of the friars. "I don't know it exactly," replied Leto. "With the words that the stone of Venus have told me in the secret cavern. I think that they refer to the place where we must go." Suddenly, I had the conviction that I had to communicate it to our attackers. And you see now the result. It seems that they know its meaning. In that moment, the litter, with its strange occupant, was moving away rapidly, while the Gookies, because it was about Murskan warriors, the majority of them sat on the floor. They didn't stop looking to the shelter of the Spaniards, not even for an instant, the spears and arrows ready to attack. And in their inexpressive serious and slanted faces, was impossible to predict their intentions. The only certainty that the attitude of the Indians indicated is that they were disposed to wait. But, wait for what, or who? Thus, besieged in the precarious houses of stone, the hours passed by and nothing disturbed the surveillance. But, the lords of Tharsis were gifted in high grade with the virtue of patience. Not in vain they'd made guard for 1,700 years, in front of the wise sword. So they sat, to wait for the future movements of the besiegers. In few hours, became obscure any movement of the Indians, although was distinguished behind their rows, that many stakes started to burn. Soon a group of women were in charge to distribute to every guage a corn cake and a ceramic bowl, with a steaming liquid. The night became closed, and the Spaniards decided to rest, and watch by turns. Everyone achieved to sleep, due to the dawn found them in the same situation of yesterday. However, the morning, and part of the afternoon, would pass ere some change be noticed. The number of warriors, rather than decrease, it gone increasing with the pass of the hours, and now not existed any place without one of them. They covered the square, and the streets between the houses, they were on the roofs, pillars and walls, and finally, until the sight reached, they could be seen in expectant attitude, but frankly hostile. It was adverted without much effort, that they lurked by thousands, and that would be very difficult to clear the siege. At the afternoon, the men of stone realized that something new was happening. The Gurkhas stood up suddenly and withdrew to give pass to a caravan that was advancing from the exterior door of the fortress. This time were 3 litters. In one of them was the enigmatic personage of yesterday, and in the other 2 were some men, with absolute different factions than the one of the indigents. While presented characters undoubtedly Asian, the newcomers had features unmistakable of the European Occidental men. Inclusive their skin, evidently tanned by the sun exposure, was quite pale, and contrasted notably with the yellow skin of the Mursgas. Although their clothing revealed that they were indigents, from another ethnicity but indigents. They were wearing black robes of llama's wool, very similar to the Cathar tunic, and they covered their heads with black bonnets of the same material. But what most attracted the attention of the lords of Tharsis, the most incredible, were the rounded feather shields that they carried. On its center, clearly visible, was painted one of the Nectans runes. When they passed, the Mursgas released a murmur of fear, and the Spaniards observed amazed that most of the warriors avoided to look at them. When the caravan stopped, the chief to whom Leto had directed the words of the Stone of Venus called the 2 uncommon personages who accompanied him. After descending, the 3 men approached to the house occupied by the intruders. At certain distance, they stood up and talked for a few minutes. Finally, the one of the Eve came closer resolutely and screamed, "Wang Sequeliated! Wang Sequeliated!" Leto of Tharsis hesitated an instant, while the eyes of all the men of stone were fixed on him, but he went out immediately and faced the Indian. As the first time, he raised the wise sword as well. Without doubting, the 2 men, dressed in black, advanced to meet him. However, their interest was not for Leto, but for the wise sword. Both said with one voice, "Koilasana," which in Quechua means, "Stone of the Star." From the trapezoidal window, the men of stone followed the events attentively, ready to run into aid Leto of Tharsis. They not reached to hear the words that were saying, but was indubitable that Leto and the Amaltus of the Black Bonnets were speaking at regular intervals. Minutes elapsed in the same way, until the interchange of words and phrases acquired the unequivocal dialogue tone. Finally, the Lord of Tharsis turned back, and walked without problems to the shelter of his relatives. The Muriscan chief, by his part, gave an order, and the Gurkhas concentrated immediately without protest. Only the royal guard, that accompanied the litters, remained in the surroundings of the house. "What happened?" asked Valenti, unable to contain herself, immediately after that Leto closed the door. "Did you achieve to make them understand?" "Apparently the peril has passed," affirmed Leto, whose countenance was still reflecting the stupefaction that he was feeling. "Lords of Tharsis, we are facing a great mystery. According to what I have achieved to comprehend, these beings of black tunic were waiting for us since many months ago, perhaps a year or more. The words that I have pronounced yesterday belongs to a profane language, own of the empire that Pizarro has conquered. For this reason, at the beginning, we could understand each other. But then, and here arrived what I'm going to tell you, because even though it seems fantasy, it is not. They spoke in an idiom which is exclusively of the Amaltus of the Black Bonnet, some kind of initiates of the cult of the cold moon, or decreasing 80, it means, the cold death. And here comes the incomprehensible. That language is a variant of the Low German or the Danish. I don't know it with certainty yet, due to the barbarian form in which they speak it, but believe me, it would not be difficult to learn it. Naturally, you'll be as surprised as me. How it is possible that they were waiting for us, when only the gods knew that we would come. And who are these initiates, who, in such far and unknown lands talk a Germanic language? For the moment I have no answers. But what will we do now? Asked Rock. Well, it seems that the Amaltus of the Black Bonnet must guide us to some place. I guess that the guards of this fortress will be satisfied with our prompt departure, due to the presence of the aforementioned is not pleasantness for them, and ours, after the slaughter we have done either. I propose to go out to the square, and to maintain us as closer as we can to the Amaltus. So, they took the equipment and, taking the horses by the bridle, they were leaving slowly towards the large courtyard where the Amountas were waiting, accommodated in the seats of the litters. Leto went to the other house, and he realized with regretfully that the Noyo was burning in fever, and that the wounded leg was severely swollen. Taking him by the arms, he joined to the men of stone and told to them, "We can't leave without curing Guillermo. We will clean his wound with hot water and vinegar, from which some drops still remained." So, he proceeded to ask for water, trying to talk with the Amountas, but they, once warned about the state of the Noyo, gave many instructions to the Murscas, and they were dedicated to cure him. In a stone brazier, they put a recipient with water to which they added the enormous leaves of a very green plant. After boiling the petter, they cleaned the wound with its juice, to which they covered with leaves of the same sort, and after bandaging it, they brought some kind of stretcher composed with 2 large rods, and transversal cloth, laid the Noyo, and 2 warriors of the royal guard charged him towards the door of the fortress. The Murscas didn't hide the urgency that they had to see the foreigners out from their walls,